everyone, and welcome to one of our knowledge transfer sessions. Today we're going to be talking about retirement income planning, a pretty important topic for retirees because as people move from the accumulation phase to the income phase, it's a natural shift on your investments, your style, your view on your money. And one of the problems I've run into in my practice over time is I'm really confident. I've dealt with lots of different retirees, lots of different retirement situations. But usually this is the first time you've ever retired when you're looking at these strategies. And, one of the challenges you're going to run into is understanding the systems and actually having trust in one of the different types of systems of retirement income planning is critical to your retirement phase because it allows you to spend money freely in retirement. Whereas if you don't have your retirement income plan correct from a personalized standpoint, it can actually cause situations where you're always holding on to your money because you're afraid to spend it. So let's dive into retirement income planning. Now, as we always mention, these presentations have to be treated as general in nature. We're going to try and be as specific on this presentation as possible, but we tend to generalize a lot of concepts and information that there could be more nuance behind the scenes, and everyone's financial situation can be different. So just treat today's presentation as general in nature. A little bit about myself. I have more than 18 years experience in the financial services industry. I love what I do. I love my practice. I love my clients. And I really like creating these knowledge transfer videos so that, my style is actually to educate people and create as much knowledge as possible. So I really appreciate the chance for give you this video today and for you to watch it. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about overall income planning concepts. Basically, what do you need to know if you're going to start creating an income plan for yourself? Then we're going to dive into the three main styles you're going to find in the financial services industry. Why? Because you should understand what the financial services industry has already set up for you, and then you can modify from there, basically. And then we'll give some suggestions at the end of this. But let's talk about the overall income plan concept for retirees. What do you need to know when you start to create your income plan? Well, we run into a basic problem, and it's, if you think about it, everyone watching this video today probably has a bank account, and they've treated their money differently. How you'd manage your finances can be incredibly different from one person to the next. And what I found is there are so many different ways that you can create income on yourself. We call it a do-it-yourself strategy. That as I was creating this video, I was like, well, what would I really want someone to know? I was like, well, if you have these good strategies that you do yourself, these are great, but here's how the financial services industry also creates retirement income, and you're going to naturally create this blend between what you do yourself, your belief systems, things of that nature, and the overall retirement services industry, how they typically do income planning. And when we talk about creating a retirement income plan, there's 5 big problems we need to run into that you should really consider as part of your retirement income plan. Whenever someone makes a retirement mistake, I think it's going to be around one of these 5 problems, basically. Your life expectancy, right? A lot of people are like, well, I might die early, I might live a long time. Have you actually looked at your life expectancy? Inflation. Inflation is one of the most destructive things on a retiree's income, their portfolio, everything. What's your inflation plan? What's your plan for market fluctuations? Are you I don't want to touch the market whatsoever versus you're really market strong, more of a boglehead style investor? What's your health look like? Are we worrying about we need to create more retirement income early in retirement? Because you might have health issues that suggest you can't have as much fun later in retirement. And then what's your tax situation, right? Every retirement income plan inherently is going to create some level of taxes typically or tax opportunities. And so these are kind of the 5 big problems you kind of have to consider when you're creating a big, robust income plan. And then we want to talk about the basic benchmarking, right? This is the basic benchmark that anyone should be able to do, okay? It's not guaranteed, but anyone should be able to basically do this. And basically the idea is if you have a pool of money, let's say it's $500,000, the retirement services industry, yourself, anyone, should be able to create 4% cash flow on that or 4% income, and the money shouldn't actually decrease. It should work more like an endowment. Now, once again, that's not guaranteed, but mathematically, and throughout my practice, I've seen this to be true as well. It typically does not ever decrease, and typically actually grows. Now, we're in basically the 20 best years of market history we've ever had. So it may not be a good example for you going forward. That's why we have to say it's not guaranteed. But we also have, other benchmarks here, the 3% rule, the 5% rule. This is a basic benchmark for yourself. And here's why this is a problem. A lot of retirees hit retirement, and they are afraid to spend to at least this benchmark because they don't know how to justify it in their mind. Okay, and so is also when we talk about retirement income planning, one of the basic challenges we need to run into is, different people should actually blend retirement strategies. There's not, as I always think to myself, there's not always one just perfect way. I actually think a blend is ultimately going to be the best way to do this. But you should understand the three basics. This is as on their own, right? And then we should go into, maybe some blending strategies makes most sense for you. And the three basics I would say that the retirement services industries, will do for you is what's called asset allocation, income generation via dividends, interest, things of that nature, and guarantees via annuity contracts. So let's kind of look at these, each of these different approaches and kind of get a sense of, strengths, weaknesses, find what fits you. So let's talk about the classic 60-40 stock bond split and the 4% rule. In the financial services industry, this is always a math argument. When you're a retail investor, someone who's doing this on yourself, you typically never get to this math right here. And I got this from Vanguard, but you can find similar math with any financial institution, actually. And basically the math argument is this. If you're in a 60-40 split based upon current market situations over the last, I think Vanguard did over the last 100 years, you should generate on average an 8.8% rate of return. Now, averages don't describe the individual, so that means your individual will be somewhere different from 8.8%. And then your volatility, and this is where people don't realize what an asset allocation does, is your volatility says that you should realistically one time ever lose 26.6% rate of return. And you should one time ever gain 36% on the other side of the equation. So even though it's designed to be very moderate from an asset allocation standpoint, there's a lot of volatility on the classic blend. So when we look at this right here, the basics of the plan are this. You are going to delay Social Security as long as it makes sense to get a monthly income amount. And in this example, I'm going to use $2,800 a month. You're going to take your funds and you're going to invest it in an asset allocation model of some type. It could be a target date fund. It could be a balanced fund. It can be, any sort of asset allocation model that's mathematically determined to do the math on the previous screen, basically. My practice, I track multiple asset allocation models, right? I try and actually blend lots of different asset allocation models for more consistency. But you can just go put all of your money in a target date fund, technically. That would be considered suitable. And then you, for a lot of people, then you would take a 4% withdrawal rate. You just fill out one form and say, send me 4% annually, monthly, however you want to get your money for the rest of your life. And when you look at that math there, you're going to get about $2,800 from Social Security, $3,300 a month from your model, and you're going to be making over $6,000 a month of income for the rest of your life. And this all should inflation adjust, basically. Now, the money isn't guaranteed to grow or even stay steady. Remember that previous math I showed where you could lose 26%. But realistically, the money should be around for the rest of your life, your heirs, things of that nature. Now, the problem with this approach, there's a couple problems here. First is you need to replicate the math, right? Can you get 8.8% rate of return? I would argue that if the markets aren't as good in the future as they are right now, as long as you can have a model that should hit 5%, even in a worse market in the future, you're going to be in pretty good shape for this. I bet most people don't realize how volatile these moderate buckets can be. I'm very upfront with my clients. Like if they have $1 million, I'm like, hey, you can lose $200,000 at any time. And that's normal. Like it won't even, I'll be worried for your emotional sanity and my paycheck will be less technically, but it won't make me blink. Like I won't have a worry about the market's going to fail tomorrow, basically, because it's designed to do this. But that lets you have a basis of, well, do you want to engage in that game, or should you look at other models? Liquidity is these monies typically are very liquid. You can get your money in 1 to 3 business days, right to your bank account, typically via ACH. So this is, once again, this is the simple, I would argue, the most used model that's used in the financial services industry. It works for people. It pays the financial services industry lots of money to do it for people. And so it's kind of one of those double value situations. And you can do this yourself, actually, very successfully. I try and blend different types of strategies, and I try and beat, the standard target date funds. But you don't have to pay an advisor to do this. You can just go buy different strategies yourself, depending upon your risk tolerance and what your goals are. Now, if you really dive into these models, you're like, well, I really want to fine tune this. So I buy into this, but I don't want to just buy a target date fund. I want to get a better rate of return. Where I would argue the biggest weakness internally to these models is going to be the fixed income bucket. I would argue the basic retail investor does not have access to good fixed income right now. You look at things like mortgage-backed securities. If I tell you mortgage-backed securities, you may think of the 2008 crisis. You might go, well, these are terrible. Okay, billions and billions of dollars of mortgage-backed securities are being done all the time in the institutional markets. Right, so from an institutional standpoint, there's no fear whatsoever. You have to do appropriate asset allocation on that. You have to do good investment strategies. But things that you would look at and go, oh my gosh, I would never touch that, is why institutional investors can typically do much better on fixed income than you can yourself. And so for you, these are can you take 40% of your money and buy CDs, money market accounts, fixed annuities called MYGAs? I have a video on that. Things that could improve on these rates of return. That's your easiest low-hanging fruit. In fact, whenever I go to someone's strategy and I'm like, well, if you want to hire me for only 40% of the money and you want to do the rest yourself, this is what I would typically target. And then, I've harped on this a little bit, but the big crash in emotion, right? The Vanguard chart shows 27%. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with using primarily U.S. equities? Are you over tilted into one asset that can cause this? Classic example is I'm here in Bellevue, Washington State, which is right next to Microsoft. So a lot of Microsoft ex-employees I work with have a ton of Microsoft stock. And I really do like multiple different models when I do asset allocation. Asset allocation inherently is a math argument based upon the past, and there's different ways to look at the past. And so I like to adopt a couple different styles so that I can, as different changes occur in the economy, I can have a more coherent strategy for clients long-term, basically. And remember, no plan's perfect. This isn't a guaranteed model, so this is a model that's not guaranteed. You're going to see these fluctuations on your money. It's based on past data. Things absolutely change. This also tends to focus on U.S. equities, right? U.S. equities have dominated investment returns for 20 plus years, so all models are almost tilted towards U.S. equities. Poor access to fixed income can be a problem. I talked about that in a slide. Timing can be a problem, right? You can invest, and there's a 4-letter word that affects every retiree's retirement plan, and it's not a swear word. It's the word luck, L-U-C-K, right? Your timing here does matter when you invest in these models. And these models historically don't protect from things like the Great Recession, right? There's these extreme events that happen every once in a while where you want a 1 to 2 year bucket or even up to a 4-year bucket to protect yourself. And, stylistically, this may not fit you. So no plan is perfect. But this is a good option. It's standard. It's probably the biggest option that's used. And it works. Now, dividends and interest. I would say this is an older model than asset allocation. This is the classic, I'm going to ladder CDs. I'm going to buy stocks for dividends, and I'm going to live off the interest in the dividends. It's a really good model. It probably doesn't have as much rate of return as the asset allocation, but it does have different risk characteristics. So this is the type of thing I actually would try and blend with an asset allocation model. But here's your classic laddering a CD. You take a lump sum of money, you invest it in different maturities, and you can do this with bonds. You could buy bond funds, you could buy dividend stocks. But this is your classic CD model where you're going to have different maturities. You're going to live off the interest. The CD is going to mature, and you're going to reinvest it, and you're just going to ladder your basic money, basically. And the basics of the plan look like this. So it looks at first a lot like the asset allocation model. You take your same Social Security amount, you take your money and you invest it now in interest and dividend accruing stocks. And you'll create actually technically more interest than more income oftentimes than the asset allocation model will give you up front. And so it looks like this gives you a little bit more income. But the problem here is that that $1 million you invested day one, when you live off all the interest, you inherently know that you're going to have some inflation erosion over your lifetime. And so the big problem with this model is you can already kind of guess is going to be inflation. So depending upon your access to fixed income, depending upon exactly how much risk you're going to take with this money, you can have a problem here where and classically we see this all the time, where people buy CDs, they live off the interest, they hit their late 80s, and they luckily and unluckily didn't die, and the math suggests that the price of everything doubled on them, and it's like they eroded half their asset base. But people use this all the time, and it does work. And partially because we aren't a perpetuity. We do have an end date to our lives, and so these can actually be very effective for a lot of retirees. And so let's look at options, things that as of this date would generally fit these models, right? You could buy money market accounts. I'm not a big fan of money market accounts because as interest rates go down, they get hurt. But recently they've been great. You can buy bond funds. Bond funds, even within the fund, shows the problem of the total return is negative, even while it's paying 3.88% interest. You can buy an individual stock like ExxonMobil, a classic blue chip dividend-paying stock. And typically with ExxonMobil, you'll notice it's not giving you enough income, and you're going to want to look at a covered call strategy to bump up the income if you're going to go that route. You can look at the Vanguard High Dividend Yield Index Fund. People do this all the time. Once again, the problem with this fund here is that it has a great total return, but the actual amount of income is not amazing at all, actually. So even though it says it's this high dividend fund, I've never liked this fund because it doesn't actually pay enough income. It's more of an asset allocation fund, I would argue. There's newer kids on the block, like JP Morgan or JEPI, has a huge SEC yield because it's doing an internal covered call strategy. It has a higher fee within it, and it has a lower rate of return over the long term than something like Vanguard would. But if you're more of an income style, this is potentially an option for you. Now, the problem when we do with income-based investing, and even JEPI's the problem with this, is you do something called the reach for yield, right? So a CD you can buy, and it can pay, say, 3.5% right now. Probably not what you want from an income perspective. Some people watching this video will be like, I'll take it, because you don't want market risk. But it's probably not what you want from an income perspective. So then you start looking at real estate. You start looking at tactical credit. You start looking at high yield bonds. Those more institutional actually investments, I would argue. Retail investors can definitely engage here, but I would argue these are more retail-based investments. And the interesting thing about each of these investments is when you look at the risk score, it actually has a lower risk score oftentimes the S&P 500. Not everyone on here, like the Realty Fund, doesn't have a lower risk score than the S&P 500. But if you go to Morningstar and you look at the risk scores for all these things, you're going to see that the risk score is lower. And you're like, well, John, you told me that there's a reach for yield. And reach for yield inherently means you might have more risk. But the problem here is that that more risk comes into more structural or catastrophic risk. Using private credit as an example, private credit's great until the exact time that people stop paying their debts, basically, until we have an economic crash. And then private credit can catastrophically fail. It doesn't just necessarily go down 20% in value. Certain funds will literally go out of business, and people will lose half their money, 2/3, all of it. Each of these things can have what's called catastrophic risk. And so, it's the problem with when you want higher producing income vehicles, having good asset allocation, even within this standpoint, is going to be really important. And so just living off dividends, I would argue, is hard. Whenever someone wants to do this strategy, I find, not always, because, especially if you're watching this video, you're probably a pretty good self-starter. But this is typically where people start hiring people to do this for them. Because just living off the 4% baseline and trying to get inflation protection and trying to grow the money a little bit potentially is hard. You have to tinker. You have to make changes over time. Fixed income is truly a different asset class. Things that produce income, I would argue, have been gated towards the wealthier, and retail investors don't necessarily have access to good asset classes here. They can have high liquidity risk. Sometimes you buy these things that pay you 6-7%, and you can't get your money out when you want it, other than that cash flow. And things like covered call strategies, totally doable by the individual, but hard, and you have to learn about it. And so I would argue that this style is hard to do. Now, annuities are much easier to do, actually, and they come with a implicit guarantee. And so this is also one of the older styles. This is actually, I would argue, the oldest style of retirement planning. The word annuity comes from the Roman word annua. If you were a legionnaire and you actually made it through a war, the Roman government would give you a grant of land called annua, and that's what you'd live on for the rest of your life. And the Romans were the first to create actuarial tables. And you saw these actually used a lot in Europe, where you would give a lump sum of money to the monarchy, to guarantee that you would never have the fall from grace. Meaning they would give you a stipend for the rest of your life in exchange for a whole bunch of money, because they want to go fight a war and get a whole bunch of pillaging and land and etc. So they'd give you this stipend for the rest of your life, which is the classic immediate annuity example. And so in this, the basic idea is you are going to transfer risk. You're going to take usually the bond portion of your portfolio and you're going to give it to an insurance company in a lump sum. And then they're going to guarantee you a stipend for the rest of your life. And it's either going to be immediate or deferred to some other date, but it'll be defined by contract typically. It's a guarantee. And so the basics of the plan are this. Once again, same Social Security number. But now you're going to take usually a significant amount of your assets to buy a income base via an annuity. And you want this to be the bond portion. You want the annuity to replace the fixed portion of your retirement plan. And typically, you typically see these used a lot in deferred products as opposed to what's called an immediate annuity, where you want to kind of start this a little earlier. So like you take the market risk off at age 60 and you start income 6 years down the road, and you can define that potentially at $50,000 a year of annual income. So you have a contract, you bought at age 60, and at your year 6, you get $50,000 of your income. And so at retirement, you actually potentially can have more income. There's some nuance to sometimes the market will be stronger here, but potentially you could have more income. And it's all guaranteed by an insurance company, right? So you're taking insurance company risk, but you're taking market risk off of the table. And so this can be a pretty effective way with one transaction to strip out the bond component of your portfolio. You could be more of a boglehead investor if that's your style. You can buy just index funds with the rest. And you've created your baseline income plan with one transaction, basically. Typically, the money you transfer the annuity over the long term, in almost every style, there's not going to be a death benefit for your heirs or no real money. Insurance companies promise it, especially if you die early, that there could be some benefits, depending upon how you structure it. But I would argue that generally you should assume that whatever money you put in an annuity will not be there for your heirs. But remember, annuities are also not perfect. Can you buy into this thing called a split concept, right? Where you're giving up access to, in that previous example of $1 million, you're giving up access to half of it, and the half that's left over, you're literally just going to let it ride for the rest of your life. You can touch it whenever you want, but you're going to regrow that $500,000. It's called a split concept, where mathematically you can define that $500,000 should regrow in about 8-ish years, depending upon the rate of return you want to use. And so, I mean, that doesn't sound terrible, and then it can actually keep doubling, and because it's only the equity portion of your portfolio primarily, it can have a higher rate of return than an asset allocation model can. But it is a split concept inherently, right? You've given up access, you've split your money. You've given up access to half, and half you've kept in equities. Inheritance typically is not strong with these type of products. So, if you're inheritance strong, the split concept, when we go to life expectancy, the math works. You sometimes have more inheritance when you go an annuity route, but if you die early, I would argue the split concept almost always has less inheritance. If the market goes gangbusters, asset allocation will blow this out of the water. So it does, inheritance is challenge here. It's ultimately an insurance play. You're insuring, the risk against the market and against you living a long time, because the annuity pays for the rest of your life. So remember, this is, whenever you buy insurance, it's not designed to be the highest rates of return, right? You're insuring against something. Because you could, as I said, an asset allocation, if the market's hot, should beat this by a fair amount. Annuities are kind of hard to buy on your own. This is one of the challenges with it. You can make one transaction and you can go off and, do index funds and be more of a boglehead investor if that's your style. But to do that one purchase here, you need to work with an insurance agent one time, and that can be a little awkward. I usually suggest be upfront with what you're trying to do, and people are usually pretty cool, but you do have to interact with someone. And these, the split concept works because you have half your money still growing at market returns, so you can beat inflation over the long term. But inflation is a worry with if you look at the annuity on its own, it's not very good against inflation. And one of the challenges I would run into the annuity question is, well, should I do an annuity or asset allocation? And I like them both. Like, I'm more of a blender, is how I look at all this. And once again, the problem I always run into with asset allocation is that if you really strip out that 40% fixed bucket, and you look at the rates of return on that fixed bucket versus doing an annuity, this is why the math long-term actually sometimes favors the annuity, is because of this problem right here. But if you solve this problem, then the asset allocation can beat the annuity. So here's our suggestions. We prefer process and not product, right? We don't want someone to just go, well, I want an asset allocation, I want an annuity, I'm a dividend style. We like to go, okay, well, who are you? What stylistically fits you? And we like blending of all these plans. It is really what our ultimate suggestion is. We really do care about what feels best to you. One of the big problems for retirees is you only have one pool of money, you've worked your entire life to get it, and you have to now buy into some type of system out there, especially as you get older and you can't manage your money and finances as much anymore. You're not working anymore. And so finding the one that feels best for you typically frees you up to enjoy retirement and spend money more freely. And don't forget to do some tax and required minimum distribution analysis. These should inherently have basic inflation protection built in. They understand, longevity risk. These all solve longevity risk problems. Really, it's the tax and required minimum distribution analysis you have to think about here. We're here to help. I'm here in Washington State next to Overlake Hospital. So if you ever have any questions on any of these solutions or ideas, feel free to reach out to us, or if you have feedback, and we always love getting that. Most of the time we love getting that. But yeah, we really appreciate the chance to do these videos, and we will keep coming out with the next one. Next one's going to be top 10 retirement mistakes we see in our practice, and we'll go through here's what we see people do, here's what you should consider doing to go against it, and we'll see if that's useful to you. Thank you.